Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brand Innovators Livecast series. My name is Diana Dilworth. I am managing editor here at Brand Innovators. Welcome to today's European virtual livecast on digital innovation. We have a number of great brands lined up for today's event that have found unique and creative ways to innovate through digital channels. And I'm thrilled to kick off this live cast. We've got a phenomenal event with an awesome lineup of marketers coming to us virtually from companies including Boots UK, Reckitt, and Electronic Arts. We'd like to thank all of the marketers for taking their time to speak and present here today, as well as a big shout out to our sponsors for helping make this event possible. Remember that we're live. The Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen can be used to ask questions. We'll get to them at the end of each session. Please do ask questions. The chat widget is there too. It's just for our audience and listeners, so you can use that to connect with attendees and discuss the event in real time. With that, please let me introduce our first group of marketers. I would like to welcome Paula Bobbitt, who's the e-commerce director at Boots UK, which is one of the largest pharmaceutical retailers in the United Kingdom, and the moderator Emma Mondolino, who's head of Nextdoor Create at Nextdoor. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Good afternoon to everyone.
Yes, good afternoon. Well, thank you both for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you. So I am going to leave it to you guys.
Thanks. Hi, Paula. Good to see you again.
Hi, Emma. How are you doing?
Good. So I will jump right in and kick us off. I think we can kick off with quick intros. I'm Emma Mondolino. I run Nextdoor Create at Nextdoor. For anyone that's not aware of what Nextdoor is, we are the neighborhood network. We're a hub for trusted connections and the exchange of helpful information, goods, and services. To break down what that means in layman's terms, we connect you to everything happening in your neighborhood, whether that is looking for recommendations on the best dry cleaner, asking for help if you can't leave your home to have someone bring you something, or finding the occasional lost dog or announcing a wild animal in your backyard. We are here for all of it. Paula, I'll hand it over to you just to give a quick intro and what you do at Boots.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I am Paula Bobbitt. I am e-commerce director here at Boots. I'm really here, I guess, to drive our online business, but also support Boots in our digital transformation.
Which you're doing very well. I'll jump into a handful of questions and just kick us off a bit broadly, because I think e-commerce has been not only a hot topic, but an evolving topic over the past couple of years. So what have you seen shift over the past couple of years? Maybe some of the things that felt like they were meant to be fleeting and now seem like they're sort of permanent staples in the e-com space.
Yeah, I mean, the pace of change, I think, of e-commerce over the last 2 years is phenomenal. I think I read somewhere that it's something like 10 years of innovation in the space of about 1 or 2. So huge change. Certainly for us, the distribution of products and services is becoming increasingly more important. Boots is the #1 retailer in the UK of health and beauty. Over the pandemic, we tripled our volume effectively. And so supply chain, whereas it's always been important, suddenly become more important than ever, and particularly, for convenience and immediacy. We put a huge amount of investment into our supply chain, both through automation and technology, but also using our stores as mini warehouses to effectively pick our products. Over Christmas, we have 78 stores operating as mini hybrids, and they pick something like 35,000 orders per day, which is absolutely phenomenal. So supply chain, convenience and immediacy, that need to get that product when and where you want it, never been more important. I think there's also, the shift towards e-commerce more as an experience rather than a transaction. So we've certainly seen the importance of being able to do things like virtual masterclasses, virtual consultations, be able to bring that advice that you'd typically get in store onto your e-commerce site. And then clearly the importance of just having a really fantastic experience. That's not going away.
It's incredible when we think about how much is involved and how much has happened. I just think there's always a shout out to essential workers, the many folks that were working your stores and warehouses for that matter, but also everybody involved. And I'm sure building all of these systems online to keep up with that, because it's just tremendous. You had mentioned initially when we chatted as well that I believe 90% of all Boots stores are within 10 minutes of your customers. So delivery and pickup times continue to get faster, and you had an amazing opportunity to really run with that, given what you were saying and how you use stores and connecting people to what they needed from the site. There's also a partnership with Deliveroo that's been going on to help facilitate that delivery. And so I think you said it kicked off in August and has been seeing some great success. Could we chat a little bit more about how that came to be and what's happening?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the pandemic definitely taught us the importance of convenience and immediacy. And we have over 2,200 stores from Boots in the UK. And as you said, like 90% of them within 10 minutes of our customers. What that really gives us from a delivery perspective is a fantastic opportunity to get those products into the hands of our customers, sometimes within 20 minutes. So we've started with 14 stores. What we've seen as surpassed our expectations in terms of customers wanting to get those things. I think largely helped by the fact that, if you're unwell and you can't go out, or you've got sick children, suddenly we can get the medicines into your hands, in 20 minutes, which is amazing. We started initially with about 400 products, mainly sort of in the healthcare and baby space. But actually, as we've seen, the partnership progress, we've now arranged over 700 products. And there's, some interesting things in there. It's generally your immediate needs, so cough, cold, stomach, bowel. But we're also starting to see, last minute gifting creep in there. So particularly over Valentine's, where people maybe haven't bought their fragrances, it's a great opportunity to get it into the hands of those who maybe forgot to make their purchase. We're so happy with it that we're looking at, how do we then roll that out further and really scale it? At that point, we then have national coverage across the UK. And I think, that's a really phenomenal step forwards for the convenience for our customers.
There are a lot of things from the pandemic that I'm not excited we are keeping, but I am very excited about that convenience factor. I feel like there is so much things like getting medications or picking up things that were essential that you needed. And now companies like yours that are making it much easier to get just the ordinary things that we want brought over on a regular basis, I think is great. So I'm very, very glad that those trends are sticking around. On our end, we saw something sort of similar where something that felt essential, we had something called a help map, and people could mark if they were available to give help to their surrounding neighbors. And it felt like a very essential tool to have. And then as time went on and we kind of settled into our new normal, we found people were asking more often for help on printing or asking if anyone was around for a walk, much more so than picking up medications and things, because you realize the opportunities you have and the convenience. So I'm glad to hear we're going from just things like meds to a little bit more fun on holidays. On a little bit of a more serious note, for some other partnerships, you also recently announced a partnership with Recite Me having to do with accessibility, which I think is very cool. I was not familiar with Recite Me before, so perhaps you can tell us a bit about them and how you're working together.
Yeah, so I think we are the UK's first retailer to have accessibility tools on the website. We are passionate in Boots about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Boots is for everyone. And what this allows our customers to do is to go onto the website and change, whether it be the language, the font, the colour, effectively adapt the whole experience to what they need. And so it's also, I guess, supports all kinds of neurodiversity. And it's really, the first step towards making ourselves as accessible as possible. And we also have initiatives in the background around diversity and inclusion for suppliers. We are really passionate about, making Boots the place for everyone to go.
I love injecting little tidbits of my personal life that everyone may or may not be interested in, but this felt like an appropriate small tidbit. My father-in-law is colorblind. I gave him a Lego set that I thought was a phenomenal gift over the holidays. He spent hours labeling bags with saying what colors each piece was that his wife had to help him with. And it did not occur to me what a process this would be versus fun. So I think accessibility is huge and something that we miss and don't think about. And we think we've made these sites so easy because now we've given people the tools, but there is really a missing step in so many different ways. And so thinking about that, I think is great. And I think is probably going to help set a precedent and trend amongst the entire industry, which we'll need to do more and more of as we keep being more connected. And then
completely agree with you, Emma.
yeah, for my father-in-law, if no one else, to make sure that he can play with his games. And for these partnerships, how are they playing into your goals? I imagine your goals in 2022 are still not as normal or as easy to plan for as you thought 2 years ago. But how are you setting goals, and how are these partnerships playing into those?
Yeah, I think, the acceleration of pace of e-commerce does mean that where you naturally have gaps, it's easier then to partner with someone to fill those gaps. So, Deliveroo is a great example where we want to be really convenient on delivery, and actually they're a fantastic partner for us. I think the other thing that it opens for us as well is being able to tap into new customer segments and new markets. And definitely we're very much on a journey of how do we start to bring in the younger consumer. We're a 175-year-old business, and so actually attracting that younger customer set is really, really important to us, partly through actually bringing on things like new brands. We've recently introduced Revolution, and we've also brought back our iconic 17. In fact, launched online last week and in stores only a couple of days ago, and that's really driving traction with that sort of 18 to 25-year-old age group. And we're also, using that to reach out to customers in different ways and talk to them in different ways. The other thing, I guess, that's always still going to be on the agenda is supply chain. So we've talked about Deliveroo and the convenience there. We're also looking at how do we get to a really compelling collection proposition. We're very much about the democratization of premium beauty. So, for example, you can get your Fenty and Padstow from us without having to travel to the major cities in order to do it. So I think our goals in terms of having a great site experience is still the same, and lots to do in that space, but really tapping much more into convenience and immediacy, and they're really starting to leverage the strength of our omni-channel business. As I said, from a supply chain perspective, that was really powerful for us over the pandemic, but there's more that we can do in that space to really make it a seamless experience for our customers.
Yeah, and I think the younger demographic piece is one that keeps growing. Talk about a group that likes convenience and wants things to keep up with them. They are it. We actually found in a recent study we published an insight series on a quarterly basis, and we saw that over a third of the 18 to 34-year-old group in the UK specifically is really looking to brands to help them improve their skills. So there are many things that brands need to do. They need to help us save the world, they need to be convenient, and they also need to be giving us new skills. And I think you're checking all those boxes. In addition to bringing on some of the brands like 17, you also early on mentioned hosting masterclasses and looking to integrate into sort of helping these connections and allowing people to have more opportunities to learn. Can you tell us a little bit more about those and what types of masterclasses there are?
Yeah, certainly our vision for Boots is to bring, I guess, what we see as the convenience of our stores and the expertise in our stores onto our online business. So we've started with sort of these virtual masterclasses. So brands will come on and present about their products, how to typically, apply those products. And that's really opened it up to an audience to be able to connect with those brands, but also connect with us in terms of the expertise that we can leverage. We also have that from an in-store perspective. So we have over 800 Boots beauty specialists who can offer that advice. And what we're working on as a sort of a next step is then how do we bring those in to be able to do proper virtual consultations online. We did that on a small way over the pandemic, so particularly with No7. So you could have a consultation with a No7 consultant who would recommend the right products for you. But we want to expand that out, and make that a really big part of what we do. There's also, beyond the beauty space, what we want to do from a healthcare perspective. So we've recently launched our new online health hub. We also have Boots Online Doctor, which allows customers to connect and get advice without actually having to visit their GP, and get their medications delivered to their door. So there's very much a focus on how do we leverage that expertise digitally, and obviously talk to our consumers in a very different way.
And do you think that that's also helping with not only tapping into what we heard from our younger demos of what they need, but also helping you to differentiate from some of the larger companies? I feel like Amazon is a beast and is just taking over everywhere. But I think that is something that only you can do in 175-year-old brand. You have a few years on them to be able to think through what the customer is really looking for. Is that part of how you guys are thinking about this, and any other ways that you're trying to differentiate and stand out?
Yeah, I definitely think there are something like 75% of women in the UK have an Advantage card. So in terms of, access to that customer data, what they're doing, how they're shopping, that's a huge strength for us. And the first party data that we have from that is incredible in terms of being able to start to personalize those journeys. So personalization will be a key part of that differentiation. And then to your point, having a stores business as well as an online business means that we can really leverage the strength of omni-channel. So whether that be through our online consultations, our online doctor, our health hub advice, really bringing that in-store experience into the online experience so that we move away from being transactional and for somewhere that people will go to seek advice, which we know that they can't get through other pure players. And that also then taps into, that real convenience piece. Yes, Amazon is very, very convenient, but Amazon can't, deliver to their customers in 20 minutes. So I think we're really trying to take the strength of our stores and translate that into how do we build a really strong online business as well.
I think it's brilliant. There are many things that Amazon can do, but they do miss that piece. And I think it's great to see how we're all trying to innovate and work around that. And so I think these are a slew of really incredible partnerships that you guys have come up with and thought through, especially given launching that many brands in store and how much you set up over the past couple of years. In addition to all of those things, I think some of your team in the background has also been working on building a pretty killer app. When we chatted, you had mentioned that 20% of your online sales are actually coming through the app, which is phenomenal and a really incredible metric. It means the app must be up and firing. Talk to us about the app. What can you do on it? And why do you think you've seen such success in the conversion space there?
Yeah, I mean, the app has definitely been the star of the pandemic and probably actually surpassed our expectations in terms of performance. Part of that is obviously driven by our loyalty card. And what we're really looking to do is to bring that loyalty card, I guess, more into the modern space. So we launched Price Advantage in stores in January, so that allows you to get discounted prices based on usage of the Advantage card. We're bringing that omni-channel in the next few months. So that will really give even more reasons to use that app. We have a really strong slew of digital offers. Those are personalised to customer type as well. So you know that you can go on there and get the best deals on the products that you want to buy. Our sort of future evolution of that, we've already invested in making it a lot faster. So we're 75% faster than we were. Still more to do in that space, but making that a really great experience. And then our ultimate vision is it becomes the digital front door to Boots. So we start to bring in more of our online doctor, more appointment booking. We start to use it to really connect the physical and the digital. So our sort of future plans involve being able to scan and go. I guess really turning it into, our ambition is to be like the best UK high street app. And, we already have a really loyal customer base on there. So it feels like a huge opportunity to really develop that out further.
Yeah. How originally were you helping drive awareness to the app? Because I feel like there's the loyalty program sounds like it's one of the main factors, and that would certainly drive me there. I love a sale and a discount, but are there other ways that you were helping promote the app? Was that part of an omni-channel strategy?
Yeah, it's certainly something we're encouraging our advisors to do in store. So that's definitely one of the reasons to do it. We're also investing heavily in the app store and making sure that we're optimized in that space as well. We do a lot through our paid search activity to really drive awareness there, and obviously we promote it on the website. The other thing that we've been doing quite a lot recently as well is starting to really drive exclusive sales. So if you're an app owner, for example, you could have got access to 17 before the rest of the general population a day early. And we're doing the same thing with some of the new brand launches to really encourage usage and stickiness of the app.
Smart. And I feel like we have covered on so many different things that you guys have already jumped into. But one of the final questions I wanted to ask you is any upcoming trends that you've seen and are excited about? I think both directly within your business or things that you may have seen pop up around the industry, just as we are still early on and still a ways to go and things to see this year.
Yeah, I think social commerce is going to be absolutely huge, and it's a very different way, I think, for e-commerce directors to think about their business. Traditionally, it's always been about capturing person onto your website and being able to convert them there. Now, there's a whole slew of marketplaces that you need to be present in, and we're very much in the space of being present where our customers are present. So social commerce is going to be a really big one for us. We're already doing things like for the 17 launch, we worked really closely with Tilly Ramsey. She effectively was streaming to her 10.2 million followers on TikTok and interviewing people as we did the launch. So we're starting to tap into that space. But our eventual is that we want to be where people are shopping, so that when they have that impulse to purchase, we are there right away. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you come to our website to do it. Similarly, for things like the new payment providers, so Klarna and ClearPay, again, those are great marketplaces where you tap into a new consumer and generally a younger consumer. So that's definitely something we'll be focusing on going forwards. The other thing for us is around sustainability. Really pleasingly, in December, we actually achieved plastic free on boots.com. I think, this space is going to be huge. We removed over 157 tons of plastic from our products. So I think that as a trend going forwards as well is going to be something that, that we really, really focus on.
That's really great. I think both of those trends, I feel like sustainability has been coming up so much, and there's a real pressure for all of us to do our part. I am always amazed because I feel like those stats and having done that much already and then believe that there's still so much more to do is really incredible. And on the social commerce front, I feel like that will inevitably be the buzzword of this year and likely next year. It just feels like there is so much opportunity. And when we think about convenience and skill sets and all of those pieces, there's just so much that can be done. I think where one of the last questions I'll leave with is just, are there any places where you are learning about social commerce or tapping into folks? You mentioned TikTok. I've spent most of my career in the social space. I imagine you're getting some inputs from some of the platforms and helping to get some learnings from them. I think probably for most folks that are dialed in here, it's just such a major topic. Are there places that you've found that have been really helpful in helping you navigate the space and learning more about social commerce?
Yeah, we actually had a day a few weeks ago where we actually got all of the platforms to come in and present to us about, what's up and coming, what their vision is, where they're going to. We had TikTok, we had Facebook, we had Instagram. And I think, that was an amazing way just to learn, A, kind of what space they're in now, but B, where they're going to and how we should tap into that. I think, attending things like this is also really helpful in terms of just being able to learn more about what's going on. And that's the great thing about e-commerce. You're always learning, things are always changing. The next big thing I think will be the metaverse. And there's a lot more learning I need to do about that as well.
Oh, me too. I think I've just finally wrapped my head around what an NFT is. But I'm happy that that's a little bit outside of the realm that we both live in, so that I can focus on words like social commerce that I can understand and know how to pronounce. I think that was about everything that I had. I feel like we've tapped into such a massive array, and there's so many exciting things coming for you this year. Deanna, I don't know if there is a way to turn on the chat, if there's anything that's come in that we can answer from the group in our last 5 or so minutes.
Haven't seen any questions coming in, but I actually have a question myself. And by the way, thank you both. That was a great session and a lot of interesting learnings there. I'm curious, as you guys talk about social commerce, where, what kind of consumer feedback you're looking at and how that will play into how you adapt, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, I guess there's a bit of the on-site stuff, which is just, the reviews and how those play out and how they use that information to help drive a conversion, but also what we do from a sort of a product perspective. What we've definitely seen with TikTok is just really the power of those trending products. So, you know, when we launched Sky High Maybelline, it launched in the US first before it launched in the UK. And actually, just off the back of the US TikTok, we saw a huge volume of traffic coming into our site. So there's a real need to respond in real time to what you're seeing from a trend perspective. I think there's a lot about how you start to respond in terms of the social space around, you know, Facebook. We do have a team in Boots who like respond to those comments, but it's becoming even more important to do that in a more real-time way.
Mm-hmm.
I can also
Yeah,
say,
I think that's interesting.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think platform side, while I think similar to some of the comparisons of Amazon earlier, Nextdoor is of course a smaller player, but I think interestingly, we clearly look at the different trends like social commerce that are coming up too. And I think that I imagine if we're doing it, other platforms are as well. I think looking into how people have engaged with social platforms over the past 5-10 years and how that's evolved, and then thinking through what are the products we have to build, what's the research that we have to do, where will we need brand partners like Paula and Boots to help us to find out. We can put out different products and tools and initiatives, but are they working? There's no way for us to know that without the actual brand side of it. So I think there's also potential for a really interesting wave of learning together, I think, where we truly need each other. It goes far beyond advertising over the past 12 months or so. So I imagine there will be a lot of joint learning that we have to do together.
Yeah, I bet. And I think that it's just interesting to see how brands are using, are listening and trying to hear and understand, like break through what data is valuable and what data, you know, there's a lot because you break through that, and what can you learn from your consumers and how will that help you shape your products and services? I think that's just a continual conversation that many brands that I'm talking to are having.
Yeah, I think as well, it's that how do you then get access to the data? So we're putting a huge amount of focus on, you know, how do you collect first party data? How do you, you know, start to be able to track social when you don't have the cookies anymore? You know, there's a huge amount of work in that space as well around connecting all of the dots together. You know, we're lucky because we do have the Advantage card, and that allows us to collect a lot of that information. But as we sort of build out our website, all of the tools we're putting in place, but also thinking about how do we use that information, how do we capture it, how do we then use that to drive more personalized experiences, whether it be on-site or off-site.
And I guess there's Paula, I was trying to make sure we had time for questions, but folks are being quiet. So Dan, I'll sneak in one more, which is just how do you measure? I think that you touched on a great point in terms of going into a cookieless world. How are you looking at measuring success this year?
Yeah, it's it's definitely more challenging than it was a few years ago, I guess. You know, we're building, I suppose, a lot of partnerships actually to really help with that. So we've got partnerships with some of our media providers. We've got APIs from Facebook. We're effectively trying to stitch everything back together again, so that we can measure it in the right way. But it's certainly challenging now to know as much about your social performance as you did previously when you can't measure every single interaction. So a lot of it is almost doing our own stitching together in order to measure it in the most effective way.
Another place for lots of evolution, lots to look forward to.
Yeah. And thank you again, both of you, for being here. Paul, I loved hearing how you guys are keeping the advances from the pandemic and what the innovations, because obviously the convenience of being able to order medicine when you're sick and having it that conveniently available to you with delivery is a game changer.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll thank you both for being here, and I will introduce our next guest.
Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Okay. I'm moderating the next session, so no need to introduce myself. I would like to introduce to the stage Efreen Ayala, who's the Global Diversity and Inclusion Director of Marketing at Reckitt. Let's see. Hi.
Hello. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you great.
Awesome. Hi.
Great to see
Hi,
you
everyone.
again. Hi. Thanks for being here today. We're really excited to talk. And I guess if you want to just start off by introducing yourself and talking about, where you work and what your role is there.
Sure. So, hi, everyone. I am Efrain Ayala. I am the Global Diversity and Inclusion Director within our marketing practice at Reckitt. And you may know some of our brands. We have brands like Dettol, Durex, Airwick, Lysol, Finish, all sorts of brands that you probably are more familiar with. And I work across all of them to really ingrain and build the new capability that modern marketeers need to have, which is how to be diverse, inclusive, and use the power of your brands to leave positive societal impact. So I'm on the Reckitt team to kind of really help shape our brands and our marketers in market to accomplish those really big tasks. And it sounds really easy in a couple of sound bites, but those are pretty big tasks. And so I'm helping the teams develop those capabilities to ultimately leave positive impact and also growth.
Absolutely. So yeah, you mentioned these are big tasks. It can be massive. So DE&I is very broad. Can you talk about how you think about it within your company and what that looks like?
Sure. I think DE&I is quite broad. So at Reckitt, we think about our inclusion agenda across 6 pillars: people, policies, leadership, partnerships, procurement, and of course, our brands. And so I really focus on driving that brands agenda across a broader set of things that we're doing corporately for inclusion. And within our pursuit for a healthier, cleaner world, we're really doubling down on inviting groups of people who are historically and consistently left out of our category discussions. And so that's a bit of the big macro picture of what inclusion means to Reckitt. And then my specific role is really focused on ensuring our brands are participating in that agenda.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you mentioned that D&I is a new capability for marketers. Can you share more on what that looks like to you?
Yeah, I'm a digital transformation person who most recently came from that work. And I like to think about diversity and inclusion as a similar set of skills that require a similar set of capability, building moments, maturity within the marketeers to really authentically deliver. And what's really interesting is we're starting to see more and more data that connects performance to how brands are showing up when it comes to representation and portrayal. What's really interesting is Kantar, who are one of the leading research organizations when it comes to creative testing, they've been able to run creative testing across many brands across the globe and have thousands of data points. And what they're starting to see is that when you deliver diverse representation and positive portrayal in your communications, there is a significant increase in the power of that communication and a significant increase in the short-term sales likelihood of that particular work. So when we think about driving effectiveness in our creative, our communications, our digital strategies, we can no longer ignore diverse representation and positive portrayal because they are beginning to be more and more linked with comms performance. When we think about our modern day consumers, they're paying attention to these things. They can sniff out a stereotype much faster than any of us as marketeers. So we really need to be quite polished in terms of how we deliver this. And it sounds really easy. Great, diverse casting. I'm just going to talk about it at the casting step. And I think that's the trap most marketers fall into, is that you only address diversity and inclusion within a casting context. But in reality, it has to happen at every step of the creative process for it to be authentic, for it to not be seen as woke washing, if you will, which is where consumers are becoming more and more astute at picking out brands who are clearly doing, diverse casting because they feel compelled to, versus they've articulated the way in which their brand can actually drive impact with underserved or historically excluded groups. So it's a nuanced capability, just like data-driven marketing. And just think about how many data-driven marketing courses your company has put you through or that you've tried to take to really kind of grapple the opportunity. diversity and inclusion is that next thing for the modern marketer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So it's such an interesting perspective, the way you're bringing together digital and looking at data-driven marketing to the DE&I conversation, because I don't feel like I hear that from a lot of brand marketers, or maybe certainly the brands are looking at both categories, but maybe they're different departments and they're sitting in different offices, or, obviously we're all working at home right now. So, different places and maybe not meeting. Can you talk about how you are accomplishing, how you bring DE&I objectives and impact goals into digital marketing and digital innovation?
Yeah, I will. It's a new space. It's a new frontier for a lot of marketers, and a lot of the existing tools will really help teams who are developing TV commercials, because Kantar link testing typically is addressing TV commercials or big splashy assets where you're really making a conscious big effort to stand out. However, in a more diverse media environment and media landscape for brands to reach their consumer groups and drive performance, digital solutions don't really exist to really measure representation, really measure portrayal outside of whatever the team feels, right? And if the team that's working on the digital assets are collectively holding an unconscious bias, it's going to become applied in the work. And so we've been really trying to learn and lead in this space, because we feel like we have the tools and resources to get better with our TV work. But thinking about digital, where you might have a couple of TVCs and it's like a couple of assets, so it's quite easy to do a check and make sure you've got that representation and portrayal that is strategically relevant. But when it comes to hundreds of digital assets that you might be developing in the programmatic space, or you might have a creative technology delivering iterations of creative that maybe even human eyes aren't always looking at, how do you really ensure that your representation and portrayal goals are coming to life in those digital assets that you're producing at such scale? So for Reckitt, we're really trying to learn in this space. And so we've partnered with Creative X, which is a creative best practices technology. So typically what most people might know Creative X at is the ability to look at a piece of digital creative and make sure that the key creative principles are being met, and reporting on that, or even preventing anything that doesn't meet creative best practice to go live. Creative X has developed a new tool in beta still that is called their representation tracking. And it applies a similar approach where it's using an AI to scan what's happening in the ad, but to measure out representation across age, gender, and skin tone, but also the portrayal of those three groups, right? So what do you cast those people in? Are you casting them in family roles, domestic roles, leadership roles, physical roles? And I think one more, and professional roles. And so I love to talk to teams, because they're like, yeah, we're really good at D&I in our comms. Look at how diverse our casting is. And so then when I use the tool, I can say, yes, you have a lot of, let's say, skin tone diversity, but why do you always cast the professionals or the doctors as white people? You might have a bias coming through because we don't see any of your digital assets containing a doctor or a professional that has a darker skin tone. And so being able to understand how our brand shows up is really critical in order for us to really walk the walk. And digital assets oftentimes get completely left out of the discussion when we think about delivering diverse representation and positive portrayal, because the scale is almost unmanageable. And so that's why we're really excited with this pilot that we are working with Creative X, is to understand how do we get a better grasp on what's happening within our broad digital collection of assets.
Right, because it's so, the scale of it is enormous, as you say. And so it's so interesting, because AI obviously can do a lot of things, but portrayal is like a very difficult thing. I wonder, are you helping train the engine, or is your partner helping to do that so that, you can really train, oh, look, this is X, Y cliche, gender stereotype, skin color stereotype, and how, what are some of the elements that they're identifying to help?
Yeah, sure. So it's a really good question. And I think fundamentally, we all need to understand that an AI is the output of people's work, right?
Mhm.
And so if people hold bias, it will likely get coded into the AI. So it's a live tool that we're constantly working with the partner on CreativeX to make sure that we're developing a tool that also is as bias free as we can make it. So we're getting more of an objective view on what's happening in front of the camera when we think about our digital assets. But the way it works is it uses contextual clues to articulate the portrayal you are using on that human actor that has been cast in that photo or that video, or even the stock images you might be using to deliver your scale of assets. And so if it sees a young woman of color shopping, they will then be articulated as a young woman of color with a certain type of skin tone using the Fitzpatrick scale, but then also say it's a domestic portrayal because we see the person doing a household shopping activity. And that's very domestic, if you will. Whereas if that person was cast in a doctor's lab coat with a stethoscope, that would be a professional portrayal. And so the tool is able to scan hundreds and thousands of assets in real time, and our dashboard gets updated in real time with all of our spend happening through programmatic spaces like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. So we can continue to keep track on the work that we're producing at scale. And with creative technologies, does that align to the way in which we want our brand to be showing up? And so it requires a lot of human interpretation of the data, because we can't rely on a machine to pick up all of that nuance, because it is nuance, right? You might not notice some of these things that you'll have to be mindful of. And so the ability to look at the data objectively, but apply a human frame to it has been really helpful in really providing more objective discussions within the topic, because that's also a trick. Sometimes teams, it becomes a very subjective exercise to talk about, is this diverse representation? Is this positive portrayal? This really kind of enables us to have a more objective view to what's happening, and thus enable more capability building, more strategic choices and discussions that we can then start to implement within the work and then track again with the tool.
I love that. It's so fascinating how you can identify both different people and then with the behavior, and then use that to determine whether or not the portrayal is a good one and one you want to be associated with as a brand. I'm curious, just as a digital marketer, where there's also so much targeting to consumers, how do those two things go together? Is there a correlation in terms of how, who you're targeting? Because that's something brands are always talking about, and how you ensure the portrayal is diverse to everyone, no matter who you're targeting.
Yeah, I think it is where I like to tell people to start is really understand what role does your brand have in society, and look at who's being left out of that discussion in your current category. So it's first starting to understand who has the category historically left out, and let's be sure that they start to feel included, because it can be quite difficult to be relevant to everyone in a banner ad or in a 6-second YouTube bumper. So, this whole for all mentality, I think, is a little bit of a trap. It tends to dilute teams' work, right? Because if they want to be for everyone, they end up oftentimes being for no one. And so what I like to really encourage teams to think about is, how do you drive inclusion at every step of the process? When you are doing your insights to help develop your product idea or your creative idea, are the insights built on monolithic consumer groups? And if you can't answer that question, you should, right? You should be pushing your teams to help you unpack some of that so you can get to that richness. So then you can make the choice. Is there a unique narrative that enables me to be relevant to broad groups of people? Or do I need to take a specific route because the insights guide us that people all or groups have unique lived experiences, and the role of our categories and brands may look different to those different groups. And so really the first place I want people to start is like, is your INA machine capable of enabling your brands to be inclusive to broader groups? Because if it's built on homogenous data, my answer is you're probably not ready.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating.
And when we think about, sorry, I also want to address the
go ahead
component. Yeah, I think it's targeting is difficult, right? There are different targeting regulations, capabilities, ethics, morality that surround, how we think about reaching diverse groups of people. And so it's really important that when you are developing these rich insights and nuances to help you tell your brand story, it's always making sure that you can connect that to the way in which you buy media. I find some teams fall into this trap where they have such a rich target in their mind. It's someone so specific, and then you hand that, pen portrait to your media team, and they're like, I can't buy any of this on the buying platform. And so it's making sure that those teams are also being kept close to how your brand wants to drive inclusion, so it can be translated appropriately into the digital ad buying platforms, because they're not always a one-to-one.
Right, exactly. No, it's such a good point. And it also makes me think that one of the things that we hear a lot in digital marketing and digital innovation is the behavioral targeting and not necessarily demographic targeting. And particularly in Europe with GDPR regulations, sometimes it's behaviors. So how is your brand really showing up if you even don't know who the end consumer is,
Yeah, and I think what is so interesting about this move to behavioral and contextual, which is completely makes sense, but I would really push teams to really think about, do your brand safety settings match those ambitions? Because oftentimes
Absolutely.
what you find is that you might have developed a brand safety approach and you've created a list of keywords that you want to include or exclude in your buying, but there's probably a bunch of bias in those terms because they're probably developed by humans. So it's always good to really go back and say, am I being inclusive in the way I buy media? Because if you want to start to reach different groups through different contextual targets and cues, you want to make sure that your buying technology and setup is enabling you to do that, because you might have an ambition that you're also paying a vendor to block on your behalf. And so making sure that those are aligned is such a critical part to delivering inclusive growth that oftentimes gets overlooked, because sometimes brand safety isn't the most exciting of projects and things to work on, but it's such a barrier to inclusive media buying that I really encourage people who do have a role in that to look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find it difficult just within different teams, because there are so many people who are on the media buying side and this and that, and they have their own objectives and agendas? Like, how do you get this conversation to be front on the table, as you said, if it's not the most exciting? Brand safety, for example. Obviously, I think inclusion is a very important topic that people are willing to take the time to talk about. But yeah, how do you convince this at that level? How do you bring this and make sure your brand is representative in the way you want it to be?
Yeah, I think, broad strokes, people tend to fall into a couple of camps. One is, I'm very passionate about diversity and inclusion, and I'm really excited to hear how I can bring that practice into my functional role on the team. And at Reckitt, we believe every cross-functional team has a key role to play in delivering inclusive growth and inclusive comms. And so when I talk to teams, I am very specific on their part in that journey, right? So like I mentioned, our INA community really pressure tests the source data and make sure that it is inclusive to enable the brand marketers' richness to help tell stories. Marketers, make sure you're thinking about inclusion upstream and not waiting to your casting documents. If you are only talking about D&I as a marketer at that point, you've waited too long. Media teams, think about brand safety. Think about how you reach these different groups of communities that your brands are articulating as strategic. Website people, make sure our websites are accessible. 15% of internet users are facing some sort of disability that impedes with their ability to engage with content that isn't made for them. And so website teams, think about that. So everyone has a role throughout the creative production and media process. And so for us, it's really about ingraining inclusion across the entire media value chain is what's going to enable an authentic growth strategy for our teams based on inclusion.
Yeah, that's well put. It's interesting you bring up the accessibility thing. They were just talking about that in the last session, and being able to order. Okay, so let's jump back to this. Can you talk about, we were talking about the AI and how you're using that for positive portrayal. Can you give some examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, I think some of the examples that I shared already are ones that are helpful for us at this stage in our journey. You know, Reckitt is early on in our journey, so we're kind of learning and leading simultaneously. And so what we've done is we've really kind of defined what are the key stereotypes that most often show up in our categories of, you know, hygiene and home cleaning, nutrition, and health. And so we kind of know the big buckets of stereotypes. For example, doofus dad is a stereotype you often see in our categories, where you portray a dad who doesn't know how to take care of a baby or a child, and the house is a mess and they have to go to mom for support. That's a stereotype that harms fathers as well as mothers, because it depicts that only a mom is good at taking care of the child, right? So those are some key things that we're able to look at with the tool, right? So we're able to look at, okay, what's the gender split of people in front of our camera, but also what role have we given those genders? Do we constantly see mom as the domestic family role and dad as only the professional leader role? And does that fit with where we are, where consumers kind of see what the modern home looks like? No, I think modern, like FMCGs have really built their brands on a monolithic consumer, right? For the longest time, for decades and centuries, we've built our brands on depicting a certain type of consumer, scenarios, and homes. That is no longer reflective of what is happening in people's lives. 88% of consumers say they don't see themselves or anyone they know in modern day advertising. But modern day advertisers, almost 8 out of 10 of them will say, I do a really good job at diversity and portrayal. So there's this huge gap between what consumers don't see in the modern day advertising and what marketers think they're showing consumers. And so the ability to be able to really talk about that in a data-driven way, I think, is a really big unlock for our brand teams.
Absolutely. It's crazy, that metric. It's such a disconnect. Can you talk about how you think brands can use digital innovation, how other brands to improve their D&I initiatives?
Yeah, this was a question that you gave me quite early on in being asked to come here, and I grappled with it for some time because, you know, D&I can mean so many different things in so many different ways. And so I think my answer is to flip it. Is ask yourselves, how can inclusion help you incrementally accelerate your existing innovation and digital products? So for example, if you're using great digital tools to really innovate on how your organization develops insights, you should be asking the incremental question of, is it also delivering inclusive insights? And if the answer is no, that's an innovation opportunity. Same thing with your media practice. Is my media practice able to reach these specific groups that are key to our brand? If the answer is no, innovation opportunity, right? So I almost feel like digital innovation is something we're all passionate about. And I would instead say digital innovation won't necessarily lead to more inclusion, but instead inclusion will lead to more digital innovation.
I love that. That's so perfectly said. I'm looking forward to seeing more examples of that in the marketplace and how that plays out. Can you talk about what trends you expect to see this year? Obviously, you guys are kind of a bit cutting edge at this, beta testing this kind of software to use the portrayal representation or representation and portrayal. Can you talk about what other things you see on the horizon and where we hope we'll be at this time, like next year?
Sure. I think a consumer trend we're seeing is consumers are getting much more sophisticated at being able to spot brands who are authentically trying to be inclusive versus who see it as a trend that they need to deliver within their work. You know, woke washing is the new greenwashing, right? And so we constantly see consumers, if you go to Twitter and even look at some of the commentary on NFL ads or comms, you'll start to see, oh man, I feel like they just needed to make sure there was a token everybody in this ad. And so we're going to continue to see consumers get more sophisticated and also have higher standards. Currently, 73% of consumers globally expect brands to do more about promoting diversity inside their walls as well as externally. And that is a trend that happens in almost every market globally. It's not just a US thing or a Europe thing, it's a global thing. And we're seeing it impact more and more preference choices within the consumer mind. So it's going to be a growing trend. For the marketers, the trend that we're seeing based on the Kantar link meta-analysis I referenced earlier, we're seeing a delta grow between the bottom performing advertisers when it comes to representation and portrayal and the top performing advertisers when it comes to representation and portrayal. What does that mean? We know that the social landscape is constantly evolving. Just look at the last 3 years, the discourse and the awareness of the average person has dramatically increased. And so the bar is constantly moving, and brands who are paying attention and really working to nail representation and portrayal are constantly getting better at it, where the brands who aren't are constantly falling further and further behind. So that is a trend that has been seen over 2 years, and I imagine we'll continue to see it until the marketing industry really treats inclusion just like DDM several years ago, and really putting the amount of resource training and capability building behind their organization. And of course, I think we're going to continue to see brands try to figure out how to drive inclusive growth. I think every year around Cannes, we see launches of inclusive products, and then you never see them on shelves or hear about them again. I think that trend will lose steam because consumers will start to expect, oh yeah, that thing I saw that really meant a lot to me, why can't I find it anywhere?
Right, exactly. I'm curious, and I'm just going to throw this at you. We've already seen, everyone's talking about the metaverse. It's already launched, and it's the next big buzzword that brands are talking about. But we've already seen that it can be a space for bias and a space. So I'm wondering if you have ideas about, as we start off in this new space, what marketers should be thinking about to not make the same mistakes they've made in other channels.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think across the board, platforms and social spaces have been a bit of a risky space for specific groups. Just look at all of the data that shows social media is actually harmful to youth. Okay. I don't think the metaverse is going to be any different, right? We have a fundamental problem we haven't ever solved on the existing online spaces. This new space, we'll have it too until it's actually being addressed. And so I would really ask marketers to think about who's being left out in our work in the metaverse. How do we create safe, inclusive spaces for everyone we want to invite into this space? But also, it's not just the marketer's job. We really need to, as an industry, continue to put pressure on platforms, technology leaders, as well as governmental leaders to really catch up to the lived experiences of people who are being harmed by these digital spaces.
Absolutely. And also, as you say, the people that we work with as well, like agency partners and whatnot, because there is a decision. Marketers have the budgets and the things to work with partners that are taking the right steps for progress. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It was really great talking to you. I don't have any questions in our chat today, but just want to thank you for being here. And it was really enlightening and great to talk.
No, thank you for having me. I know the topic of diversity and inclusion may feel like a little bit of a funny one to talk about within the context of digital innovation, but hopefully I've opened some eyes for all of the people in the audience on how inclusion can actually accelerate innovation. So thank you for having me. And if anyone has more questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can probably find me on LinkedIn and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. It was great. And I love the idea of starting with DE&I to put into digital innovation. That's a new perspective for me that I'm going to think about. I love that. Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay, so thank you, Ephraim. That was a great session. Our next session comes to us. We have Rob Below, Director of Global Brand Marketing and Electronic Arts, being interviewed by Marty Berman, who's the Vice President of Sales at Admix.
Hey, Rob, great to see you today. Thanks so much for
Likewise.
joining us. Today we've got Rob Bullock. He is the Director of Global Marketing at EA, right? Not EA Sports.
We kind of actually, my role sort of sits in between games label and sports label. So actually now for the first time in my career at EA, I can say, yeah, kind of sports too. So yeah.
And I'm a huge EA fan. We talked about that. So I'm super excited. Been a big fan for a while, since the PlayStation 2 days, as we talked about. That was a fun conversation. But again, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. Really quick, I just want to give a little shout out to Admix and what we do. We are Admix is the gateway for brands to enter the metaverse. I know it's what everyone wants to know. What does that even mean? We have a very simple approach that we currently own over 100 properties in various meta worlds. But really importantly is that what that does is helps mitigate risk for brands of having to think about how they're going to convert to cryptocurrency to buy land, should they buy land, or even how do they pay for an activation along those lines. So we mitigate all that risk by taking that risk away. We own the land, and then we can actually bill and transact on an IO basis. But you know, at the end of the day, it's about helping brands navigate the landscape of where the right fit for their brand should be located, building out the structure, and then assisting within activating the community. So really excited though to be here with Rob. Like I said, we had a great conversation earlier, and Rob's got a great background and obviously a great job, because who wouldn't want to work at EA? But you know, Rob, we talked about your non-traditional marketing background, and I love how you described that aha moment when you when the internet clicked for you. Can you share with everyone a little bit more about that moment and kind of how you know and what that meant for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the thing that I've always followed throughout my entire career, you know, since leaving school, was just something that which excited me, was passionate. When I ultimately felt a little bit out of my depth, it was like, oh, okay, this is probably kind of exciting. This should be something. There's something to learn here. And at the time when the internet was starting to become a platform which was available to, I don't know, folks like myself who, you know, weren't hardcore technical but had like a technical lean, then I was at the time throwing parties with a bunch of friends in London in various different warehouses, and we had to learn how to promote these parties. And so it began with flyers, and then it's like, wow, the internet, sure, maybe we should make a website. Yeah, let's do that. Let's make a website. And it just kind of, that was the beauty of that time, right? It was just, you could just do it, and it didn't really mean anything. Nobody really knew what a website was, what it was supposed to deliver, or even would anybody find the thing. And so it's the moment I started to build it, I was like, oh wow, yeah, this is something else. This is something I want to be a part of. I want to get deeper into this. This is where I go next. And I was hooked from that moment. Like, it was, I don't know, like it was novel, the idea that you could publish something onto this place and then other people could see it all over the world. It sounds kind of corny and dumb now, but I remember at the time, like I said to you earlier, it almost has like I can still feel it, I can still smell it and taste the energy of that at that moment. It was fantastic, like really cool.
Yeah, no, that's so great. You know, I've been around the space, you know, since that long, and I really feel like we're at that same moment now with the metaverse. So it's super exciting, and I know we talked about that, but it's like, you know, it's not that often that we have those opportunities in our careers to be able to participate in something like this. So that's fantastic.
Completely.
Right?
That kind of Wild West mentality that
exactly
anything can happen here, you know, nobody's really in charge, you know, nobody's making the rules. It's so good. Yeah,
absolutely. And then you know, given your background, you know, when did you begin your career in marketing? Like, and what have you found to be your biggest challenges you had to overcome given that non-traditional background?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the largely my career in marketing pretty much began the moment I actually left and started to throw these parties in warehouses, because ultimately I needed to figure out a way to tell people that these things existed, and also to figure out what it was that they would want even from an event. So actually I didn't even know I was doing marketing at the time, but ultimately that's more or less where I began. And so I suppose as my career has developed and I've chased after different dreams and, different ways of delivering, my craft, I guess when I eventually decided to call myself a marketer, I suppose there was definitely kind of an imposter syndrome situation there and a massive lingo deficiency. Whilst I think in my bones, I knew there was a system for speaking to people, like I just didn't know what it was called. And so I didn't have any of the right words, but I just had the feeling of like, no, I need to understand what it is which makes folks tick and, investigate that and, prod at it and try and figure out more about it. And then I don't know, match that to some kind of experience or product or something which could exist in the world, and then figure out a way to tell them about it. And the telling them about it part, that's the part which has taken a lot more learning. I think that's the thing which was always a bit of a it was always hard for me throughout my career to figure that out. So it's only latterly that I've been able to actually develop some chops in the kind of downstream end of the kind of marketing experience.
Right, and we talked about that, and I really love the way you describe marketing as being an end-to-end sort of linear. I don't know if I'd say linear, but sort of an end-to-end sort of process. And as in you just mentioned upstream and downstream, with brand marketing being upstream and product marketing being downstream. And I loved your description of it, and I was hoping you might be able to elaborate a little bit more about how you view this approach.
Yeah, sure. Like, I think that it's in the kind of brand management end, so way upstream. It's ultimately kind of long incubation time, right? Not necessarily, like procrastination, but just incubating on ideas. Like looking for signals in the world, things which, whether you're coming, top down or bottom up, like trying to figure out what it is that might excite an audience around any particular thing, whatever it is, happens to be our kind of our portfolio approach. So you get this kind of slow burn, long incubation, kind of potentially building these long-term plans for expensive decisions, which will live in the market for a very, very, very long time. And that stuff it's really exciting, but it only gets rewarding once we kind of enter then the next stage, which is ultimately turning that signal, which we package into various strategies for growth or acquisition or whatever it is that we're looking for, and then start to work with the product teams in order to build that into something which resembles a product, which matches the insights which we've kind of figured out upstream. And then the kind of the latter, the kind of downstream part, where we've switched from long incubation to short to zero incubation time. Decisions need to be made in seconds as opposed to weeks and months that we kind of grown accustomed to at the other end. And ultimately now we're looking at expensive tactics as opposed to expensive decisions. And that is a really and so the order of business and the rhythm of business and the velocity of everything we do changes dramatically. But it's when that comes alive, that full end-to-end experience, and we can see it from one end to the other. Oh my gosh, like that's the dream. It's too good. It's
right.
That's what keeps me locked in this job.
Of course.
When that comes alive, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, because you've seen it, you've taken it from that ideation, that whole brand marketing perspective. And then, I think, and then as you mentioned, it's like a slow moving train that just keeps getting faster and faster until, you're actually going to execute on all these things that you've been planning. And that's where that it's like you're exercising muscles that you don't use at the beginning end of the process. And then you get to the end and you're like, okay, we got to go.
Right.
We got to get this out the door.
It's kind of fun too. Like I remember once upon a time in a previous lifetime, I dabbled with programming, and I remember there was when you're building these systems where you didn't see a single thing appear on screen for years. Well, not years. Maybe it's like exaggeration, but for a very long time.
Maybe that's why you're not in programming.
Lost my job pretty quick. But like building that kind of underlying system, and then which takes a while, and then suddenly things start to appear on screen, and everything that you did in that first foundational kind of layering now is like paying off. It's like, oh gosh, right now we can go and build massive pressure in this channel because of all that work that we did in the run-up. So
no, that's it. And I love that description. I've never really heard it that way from a marketing perspective, and I thought that was really just unique and a different view. And I also thought one of the other things that we talked coming out of that, right, is how you view digital innovation and digital tech to help you gain greater insights into consumer behavior, but even dug a little deeper beyond just consumer behavior. And would love if you could share with everyone about really how you're approaching that, because I thought it was really really insightful.
Yeah, I think that I've always been a little bit, well, actually, I've always been a little bit suspicious, let's put it that way, of qualitative research. And I have to be completely honest, largely down to the fact that I have participated in qualitative research when, you know, a poor student couldn't afford a can of beans. And so, and would invent characters, you know, when I used to go to these sessions and kind of pretend that I believed certain things that I didn't believe. And I can only assume people still do that. And so I kind of have this inherent distrust of, you ask somebody, what do they think? They're probably not going to tell you the reason why. And I suppose my rationale behind that has become a little bit more sophisticated in recent years, because it's largely just, it's obvious, right? And I still do it today. People ask me a question and I'll tell them an answer that I think they want to hear, as opposed to actually what I think. And so, but what I do and what I think is something which we can now observe. And so that ability to truly study the behaviors of what motivates the people who may well be engaging with our marketing and our products is something which, that's where I'd see digital innovation being something which can really, really pay off for myself and the business that I'm involved in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's great. And, you know, we talked a little bit about challenges that are inherent with that sort of approach from a consumer behavior standpoint that, you know, you've experienced with it. So can you talk a little bit about what those challenges have been?
Yeah, well, I think it's bias, right? That's the thing that's the problem that we have, is that and so I think that ultimately what I'm interested in trying to figure out, and it gets creepy fast. So like there's a point where we have to kind of, well, okay, we don't need that much information, but I'm interested in understanding what do people really want and what do they really, really think about a certain topic. And that's where it stops being creepy. It's like, no, just this bit, the rest of it, not interested. And ultimately figuring out what is the thing which sits underneath the obvious. So what's the part which they're not saying, the subtext, the bit which we don't know about. And that comes down to, you know, smart interrogation of the data, right? And matching that with hypotheses and smart data scientists who can help us pass this stuff so that it actually starts to tell stories as opposed to confirming biases. Because I find that in myself, you know, I do the same thing, you know, like I have an idea and hypothesis, and I think, oh, I know, I'll go and reach into the data to prove myself right. And then I come up with like, yeah, I knew I was right. Look at this massive number. That shows that I'm right? And I suppose that what I'm interested in is not just uncovering what sits underneath what people say about their preferences, but equally turning that same lamp on ourselves as marketers and saying, okay, well, where do our biases live as well? What do we think, you know, just because, I mean, this is a very blunt piece of data, but just because a campaign worked with a particular audience in 2016 doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work again in 2020. And so it's like I say, blunt. That's not even like rich data. That's really blunt data, but it's incredible how many times we make that mistake and just assume it's like, yeah, cool, it's the same people, you know, we'll pick them up. And so, you know, continuing that sort of evergreen cycle of, you know, the upstream research delivering, you know, fantastically new, like right now, insights that we can then action in product and then in latterly in communications, is keeping that alive is crazy important for it to solve our own biases and the lazy blunt biases, you know, such as do the same thing we did 3 years ago.
Yeah, no. When I think, listen, we're in a space that just is moving and innovating so quickly that it's really, you know, you just can't rely on what worked before. But I love the fact that, you know, you're really trying to dig under the surface of what somebody tells you. But I think that really comes back to your personal experience, right? Because you created these characters for it and you're like, well, wait a minute, if I did that, I'm sure I'm not that unique in the world that, you know, some of these other people might be doing it. And so how do I get below that to really understand what motivates them, you know, from that for making those decisions? And it's, as we talked about, it's like you've got to get out of the conscious and into the subconscious, but in a subtle way, so that people are, you know, sort of revealing themselves in an honest and authentic way, as opposed to kind of to your point, like, telling them what I'm going to tell them what they want to hear. They want to hear their product's great. Oh, I really love this feature and that feature, but it isn't what I believe in, because it's not what I've really experienced along those lines. So
Fully.
it's a very nuanced sort of approach that you've got to take to it.
It truly is. I mean, we've seen it in some of our games, where we know that there's some of our games will require a story for people to engage with them, for instance, right? So
I've enjoyed a lot of those
interesting
stories, by the way.
Yeah, well, me too, right? And the thing is sometimes those stories, and so we tell ourselves, okay, cool, we need a story. And sometimes we can take that data point and use it really badly. In the case that we think, okay, cool, let's go and like hire like a ton of like really banging story writers to create some really exceptional, like monolithic story that really gets under the meat of these players who are looking for a rich dynamic story. And we may well spend a ton of time investing in those people, and then we will use that same crusty insight to then go and tell people, hey, come and play this amazing game because it's got this really rich story. And then we're scratching our heads at the end going, wait a minute, why does everyone hate this game? This is really weird. And we've done this, right? And so but actually what they wanted was they wanted to tell their own stories inside the video game. That's actually the thing they wanted to do. So they wanted to have the story act as cues to give them like moments to react to, like a context to kind of push back against the decisions they're making, but ultimately feel like they're telling their own story inside the game. And so it's funny, yeah, because it's the same.
No, go ahead.
No. It's just it comes from the same place. It sounds almost like the same thing, but actually the action you take off the back of that insight is nuanced, and just looked at it from a slightly different angle can result in massive success or really depressing failure to the point where everyone's going, oh man, we spent 3 years building that. Why does everyone hate it so much? So yeah. Do
you bring consumers in to get feedback and focus groups along the way to kind of understand even further? And I know this isn't anything we talked about, but I'm just curious because I'm a gamer. I've enjoyed many an EA game, and I thought that what you just said was really interesting, is because those storytelling games, right? You're going through a process, but the game changes based on the decisions that I make, but to a certain extent, right? And it's not like the open world games where everybody, I can't play the open world games, by the way. I'm really bad at it. I just don't react that quickly. I'm much more into the stories.
Sure.
But on one hand, it's frustrating in the stories because I know that there's always, there's always like some path that you can take, but it really, depending on what path you take will determine your success of the game. And so you'll try different strategies because there's not just one set way to do it. And so I never really thought about it until you put it in that perspective, that now it's like my decisions on me outsmarting the gunner or whoever's shooting because I'm going this way versus that way. And I went this way 5 times and I got killed. Right. And so now I'm going to go the other way. And so I think that's really brilliant. It's an interesting perspective to invite the consumer or the user into that game experience based on how they're playing the game.
Yeah, it's a very different way of approaching the same problem or an insight that appears to be one-dimensional. It's actually not, right? It's multi-dimensional and nuanced and actually it ladders up to something which is actually really what's the word? It's a really good bedfellow with exciting marketing, in the sense that it's about fantasy, right? It's about if we can create if we can understand what fantasy that our player might want, or in another kind of marketing vertical, like what is the fantasy which this person might buy into, or they would excite them in order to bring that into their lives. Then following through with that, like through the entire stream is the important part, rather than wrestling that fantasy into like this kind of singular experience, which is no longer the fantasy. It's just more like a frustrating experience where the game just keeps telling you, oh, by the way, you should be sad now. Like, okay, cool. I'll try being sad, but I'm actually not. I'm just annoyed you're making me watch this film.
No, I mean, I think that is that it's just such an interesting part of and then of the process, right? Because then that also gives you, like you talked about the upstream and the downstream, is that gives you more from a brand marketing perspective of, I would imagine, to weave into that story when the actual if the campaign comes out, because you're leveraging those sort of that storyline or that that exciting aspect of the game into your marketing somehow, because you've got to communicate that to consumers, like you've got to make sure that's coming through in your marketing as well.
Indeed, and I suppose that's where the investing the time, understanding what it is that we're trying to say, what it is we're trying to be as a brand, up top, so that then ultimately, what I refer to as like building the signal, like what is that signal? Bruce Mao had this fantastic phrase that he used once when I was listening to him talk. Pure signal was a thing that he wanted to put into all of his work to ensure that everyone, when they saw it, they're like, oh my gosh, I want to work with this guy, right? Because it just reeked of Bruce Mao. I thought it was like, yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, pure signal. I love that. And actually that's our job in the upstream, is to figure out what is the purest signal we have, and so that then we can then use that like further down the line. But importantly, don't be lazy with that insight, because it's very easy to project what we think that means. But actually, if we haven't done sufficient work to figure out actually where that pokes at somebody's motivation for wanting to get involved, then we're going to fail, because we could be showing them. So for instance, taking the storyline example from before, we could just show them too much story and they're going to think, oh my gosh, this is a movie, with some interaction in it. I'm not interested in that. As opposed to, this is a fantasy where I'm going to go on this adventure and things are going to react and I'm going to feel amazing, and I'm going to be in control of stuff and status and all those other things that may well motivate the player. It's getting those signals into the marketing as we flow downstream.
No, it's absolutely, there's a real natural symbiosis to it, right? So one of the things that we talked on and touched on a little earlier, and I want to get back to, is you identified that there's inherent bias in both the consumers but also your own marketing team. And how do you manage that, right? Like, how do you try and manage it from a consumer's perspective, but also from your own marketing team?
Yeah, it's a oh gosh, it's a funny one, because I'm guilty of it too. Even though I'm sitting here talking to you and saying and evangelizing about how we should be more objective and we should eradicate our biases, I'll find myself doing it. I'm like, oh, Rob, what are you doing? Again, like I'll send an email and realize it's just riddled with bias. I'll have a hypothesis riddled with bias. I'll go and prove it. And so what I've tried to get into the habit of is to start to use data in order to prove myself wrong, as opposed to prove myself right. And so even the simplest stuff, like I say, the things that are tactic that we may have used once before for an audience, which we think is the same, always challenging it, giving something a moment to be challenged, I think is the most important thing that we can do. Rather than continually searching for ways to prove ourselves right, we should be looking for more ways to prove ourselves wrong. Now, I think that the problem with that is that it can lead to procrastination, and obviously that's the enemy. Once we're in when we're trying to get things done, bring things to market, we just need to be making fast decisions. And so all of that procrastination, internalization, looking at the work, poking at it, prodding it, that belongs upstream. And because we don't have time to do it then we just have to lean into our biases and just be done with it. But yeah, I think a lot can be gained from trying to prove yourself wrong with data. And it's funny because it sounds kind of dumb, like saying it's like, yeah, obviously, but the first time I did it, it was really hard because I wasn't used to doing it. And so it took a minute to actually get used to it, because I was like, well, I don't even know where to look for this data. What query do I ask? Because the question, as any research will tell you, the question is the key, right? Right. You're getting the question right, and any data science will probably tell you the same thing. If you don't ask the data the right question, then you're not going to get an answer which is anything remotely useful. And so yeah, I didn't have the vocabulary to ask the data questions or the person questions or any of that in order to prove myself wrong. So yeah, like understanding bias. There's tons of great reading, on bias as a thing, which I think is worth all of us indulging in, because it's not just on this particular topic, right? It's amazing what the amount bias infects our daily, to and fro our work, and how much it holds us back, as a collective in doing great work. So.
But not only that, it seeps into, everybody's daily life, but depending on what they're doing for a career, it seeps into their work, which then eventually has a greater effect than they probably knew. And so many times bias is unconscious, right? We don't realize that we're doing it. We don't think of ourselves as biased, yet it comes out in other ways that you don't think of. And, I'm curious because you just touched upon it with, proving yourself wrong. And I know we've just got a few minutes to wrap up here, but, from that perspective, how, what is it that started you on that journey? Was there something you read? Was there, somebody that influenced you that you came across that shared that same view? What kind of brought you to be like, hey, I'm tired, I can't prove myself right all the time. Like, let's dig in a little deeper and figure out, let's prove ourselves wrong.
I think, I don't think I don't remember the exact situation, but I can tell you the context of it, or the kind of the broad strokes. In that I guess I'm a natural optimist, right? I want things to be great, and so I'm very quickly excited, and I'm very quickly disappointed. It's kind of a bit of a roller coaster, and equally kind of cynical, but also really the opposite of whatever the opposite of cynical is. And so I guess the point I'm trying to make is that whenever anything happens, I guess there's always a little voice in the back of my head saying, wait a minute, like, I'm not entirely sure about that. And so naturally, when we look at sometimes, I think if I recall correctly, I saw somebody presenting something, and it was abundantly clear to me that they were just all the data points they pulled. It's like, this is clearly just nonsense. There has to be another side to this coin. Like, this is too good to be true. There's no way this is real. And then maybe like 2 or 3 days later, I was preparing a report for some kind of review internally, and I found myself doing exactly the same thing. I was like, okay, God, I need a number that can do that. I need a number that can prove that. I need to show success over here. Let's find a number that shows success. And that was the moment. I was like, oh, okay, right.
You're that exactly. Because you can prove anything you want to, right? You can always justify it or provide some support to it. But taking that deeper look, like, how do I prove myself wrong? Is this really the right information I want to be able to present? So, well, listen, I know we're up at time. Rob, it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for sharing so much of your background and your thought process. And, you bring such a different approach to it. I really appreciated that. So.
Likewise, Mike. Yeah, thanks a lot for your time. It's been
absolutely.
Fun. Thanks.
All right. Fantastic, Rob. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you both so much for being here. That was great, Rob and Marty. And that's the end of our day. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us and tuning in. Big shout out to our speakers and our audience. And that's you. Be sure to check out the Brand Innovators website to learn about our upcoming events.